Hey folks, it's time once again for some low effort content from yours truly. That's right, it's a Not Actually Trek Actually comment response video where I literally do nothing but read some of your comments from my recent Star Trek related videos and then just kinda respond to them off the cuff. It's so easy, and I just want to say thank you all so much for having standards low enough to find this kind of thing acceptable. Let's get to the first bunch of comments. These first several comments are from my most recent Trek Actually video about the Borg episode of Enterprise. This one is from W. Fierce, who says, the paradox of Enterprise, where the fan service ratings-seeking episode does a better job of conveying the purpose of the show than most normal episodes. Humanity on the frontier, outclassed by a superior opponent they're woefully unprepared for, but finding a way to succeed and providing a reason to keep exploring. You know, that's a really interesting way to put it, and now that I think about it, that was a problem with Enterprise almost as much as it was a problem with Voyager. A lot of times when I'm talking about the shortcomings of Voyager as a series from where I sit, I talk about how it failed to live up to its premise, or it failed to commit to its premise and sort of become the show that it promised us with the pilot episode. And Enterprise is kind of the same thing. I don't usually talk about it in those terms, and it's not exactly the same thing as Voyager, but when you say it like this, the regeneration, the Borg episode seems to capture some of the potential of the concept of the show in a way that a lot of other more typical episodes don't. It's almost as if the creators of Enterprise constantly forgot what show they were making. Like, the show didn't have a voice. It didn't have a personality. It didn't have a purpose, except fleetingly here and there in episodes like this one and in some of the other better episodes from throughout the series. And that really, really hurts a show, you know, when it feels, because a lot of people criticized Enterprise at the time and still feel this way about it today, that one of the big drawbacks of it is that even though it was pitched as a prequel and even though it has a lot of aesthetic differences from the shows that preceded it, the TNG DS9 Voyager generation, that in terms of the stories and the characters and basically what kind of a show it was, it wound up just feeling like another Star Trek show. And there really wasn't anything bold or visionary or innovative or different about it at all beyond surface level stuff. And I think one of the reasons for that is that other than let's do a Star Trek show but make it a prequel, there really wasn't a take. You know, there wasn't a purpose, a creative purpose to it other than that kind of superficial stuff that hinted at a deeper purpose or a more interesting concept, but that concept was never really fulfilled except here and there in a few episodes, which I think is as good of an explanation as to why Enterprise ultimately failed as anything. This one's from Dracal684. Yep, that remark about rules in storytelling at the start of the review hits home to me. I've always felt that you can break any writing rule you like, so long as you know why the rule exists, and you are breaking it in a way that actively facilitates the story being told. Yeah, I mean, that's it exactly. It's sort of conventional wisdom in writing and storytelling, but it's conventional wisdom in this case for a good reason, because I think it's true. You need to know the rules so that you know when to break them. And most of the time, you shouldn't be breaking the rules. Like, the rules are the rules for a reason. And very often, if you are working on a story and it's not going very well and you feel like, you know, it's not getting to where you need it to be, most of the time, the fault is not with the rules of storytelling. The fault is with you as the writer. Because what it always comes down to is execution. When we criticize a work as being derivative or formulaic, what we're really saying is that the work itself isn't good enough to get us to not notice how formulaic or derivative it is, because almost every story told is formulaic to some degree and is derivative to some degree. Almost every story. But the really good stories capture your imagination and capture your attention and involve you, and also have enough of their own sort of creativity and imagination and original stuff so that it doesn't feel like it's all just assembled from off-the-shelf parts. And when you're watching it or reading it or whatever you do with it, you're not thinking, oh man, this is so uncreative. Oh man, this is so unoriginal. Oh, I feel like I've seen this 20 times before. Oh, it's so formulaic. It's so predictable. Like you're not thinking about that because you're being taken away by the story. And when the story fails to do that, that's when formulaic, uncreative, predictable, derivative, that's when those words come into play, because that is the stuff that you start to notice about it when the story and the storytellers are not doing their jobs. So it's not the rules so much. It's not the fact that storytelling formulas exist and that they are often adhered to. It's not the fact that there are a bunch of very familiar, very trope-driven plots that writers like to use. That's not necessarily the problem. The problem is execution. The problem is when a writer or a director or whoever the storyteller in question may be is unable to take those familiar elements and make them something new, make them feel fresh, take it and make it their own. That's really the job of a storyteller. And when they fail to do that, it feels formulaic. It feels by the numbers. And you don't want it to feel that way. If it starts to feel that way to an audience, or especially if it feels that way to you in your own opinion as you evaluate your work, then you really have failed your task as a storyteller. This one's from Douglas Johnson. I had no idea I'd be getting a Borg Christmas carol this year. I'm going to learn all the words and sing it each and every Christmas from now on. Thank you, Captain. Happy holidays. Well, you're very welcome, Douglas. That's referring, of course, to my Borg-centered rewrite of Oh Holy Night that closes the Enterprise Borg episode video. But the reason I'm sharing Douglas's comment isn't just because Douglas pays me a very nice compliment, although that's kind of part of it because, you know, I'm just egotistical, but it's because of a reply that someone else left to Douglas's comment. This is from Pong Master Fong, who says, something tells me AI might have had a hand in this Star Trek holiday tune, but if not, very clever and talented. My hat's off to him. Better take that hat off, Pong Master Fong. No AI involved. Have I not earned that much respect after all these years? After all these years of doing YouTube, after all these years of doing Star Trek related shit on YouTube, you really think that I had to get like ChatGPT to write me some Star Trek Borg parody lyrics to Oh Holy Night? You assume that like that's just beyond me? I would be insulted, but I take you as a friend, Pong Master Fong, because your user pick is a close-up of Ernest P. Worrell. So that endears me to you immediately. And I see you as a wayward friend, not an enemy. But yeah, it's a little insulting to be like, oh, that parody was really good. He must have used AI. No, my friend. I wrote it. I wrote it myself. I made it up. I mean, I made up the parody. Obviously, it's Oh Holy Night. I didn't make up that part. I wrote it because, you know, I'm just that fucking good. Here's one from Doomed Wit. That's the key to good fan service. You can enjoy it without any background. It just adds depth or texture if you catch it. After all, character in a show referencing something from a previous season is basically fan service. Continuity versus fan service is a blurred line. That's true, it is definitely a blurred line, and where a particular thing falls relative to that line is a subjective judgment, and one person's fan service could be another person's callback that is worth it, and that adds depth to a character or a story or whatever. And it's a difficult judgment to make sometimes. You have to ask yourself, is this thing that I'm revisiting, is this thing that is being brought back up from a previous episode or a previous adventure, whatever, is it something that is worth bringing back for the sake of this story that is being told right now? Is it something that adds to this character, that adds to this story in a meaningful way, that moves things forward? Or is it just an excuse to throw in an Easter egg? Is it just a member berry? Is it just, well, let's see what so-and-so is up to, and it doesn't really go anywhere worth going. It's just a reminder of something that you liked from before. And to me, if it's really in service of the story, if it really moves things forward in a meaningful and interesting way, if it really adds to the development of a character, if it really makes the story feel deeper and more meaningful and more real and pushes it forward in a way that it needs to go, right? If all of those things are true, then yeah, go for it. But if it's just to have a character pop up and wave and say, hi, hey, everybody, remember him? Right? Then lose it. It's worthless. And it's not always exactly clear which is which. But that to me is the major difference. Opinions no one cares about. The question I always had, which was probably answered but has slipped my mind, in fact, I think I've asked people before and had it answered, was Phlox figured out a way to resist assimilation but didn't make any record of it? Well, there are two possible answers to this that come to my mind. The first is the answer that I usually kind of reflexively give to questions like this, which is, don't worry about it. Right? Like, even though the Enterprise episode is set in the fictional timeline before all of the other Borg episodes, and so you would think, logically speaking, that the events of that episode would have some effect on the events of the other episodes. And so you would assume, like, well, if Phlox figured out a way to basically cure being assimilated by the Borg back in the 22nd century, why hasn't this information been passed on, and why can't Captain Picard and his crew make use of it when they encounter the Borg in the 24th century? The reason is because this episode where Phlox figures out all of that stuff did not exist when the episode about Captain Picard and his people encountering the Borg was made. And therefore, the information within the fictional timeline was not available to Picard because the writers hadn't made it up yet. So it's kind of it's a Doyleist argument. That never happened because it's a prequel and it hadn't been invented yet. And that to me is a perfectly fine answer. But if you are looking for more of a Watsonian answer, an explanation within the bounds of the fictional universe as to why Phlox's figuring out how to resist assimilation doesn't come up in any of the adventures that take place later on in the timeline, think about it this way. Phlox being assimilated and finding a way to not be fully assimilated in that Enterprise episode is a fairly unique situation. Phlox mentions when Captain Archer drops in to talk to him after he's been zapped with the assimilation tubies, Phlox says, well, it seems like the nanites, the little Borg machines that are assimilating him, he says, well, it seems like they're having trouble with my immune system. Like, for whatever reason, something about denobulin physiology makes assimilation go a little slower. So Phlox had a little more time to figure things out than people typically do. Usually when we see Borg assimilated with the tubes, like which first was introduced in First Contact. And from that point on, whenever the Borg jab somebody with their little wrist tubes, assimilation happens within a matter of minutes. Like, there's no time to, load yourself into a microwave MRI machine and fry all of the Borg nanoprobes. It wouldn't work. It happens too quickly. But with Phlox, because he has the time, because the assimilation goes slower than usual due to something about his physiology, he has the time to figure that out. So it's questionable whether Phlox's method would even be practical in the future. Like, maybe there's some Starfleet scientist with a high security clearance who knows more about the Borg than, say, the crew of the Enterprise D does when they encounter the Borg in season 2 of TNG, but it's not information that is deemed to be of practical use to officers and personnel out in the field because it's such a very, very specific situation, and unless you happen to be a denobulan who is assimilated and you have time to microwave yourself to cure the assimilation, like it's not something that is going to be of practical use. So you look at it that way. It was a unique situation that allowed Phlox to do what he did. And the other characters in the future weren't able to do that because they were not in a similar situation. Now, these next comments are from my video exploring the question of which Star Trek series ruined Q. This one's from Sonia Vaden. I still maintain that Steve's feelings about Season 2 of Picard come down to it being the product of Q showing up to Steve one day and being like, "What would you actually like to see in a Trek show?" And him responding with, "If they're going to bring back classic characters, I want to see it focus on exploring completely original ideas with them, rather than anything nostalgic." And Q smirked at him and said, "You didn't say any of their motivations needed to make sense," and did the little flashy swoosh, and Picard Season 2 popped into existence. I mean, that is a very Q thing to have done, and it's true that their character motivations really don't make any sense in Season 2, but you are missing the fact that Picard Season 2 was not about the classic characters exploring completely original ideas and avoiding nostalgia. Picard Season 2, even though it's not as overtly, like throwing fan service in your face constantly like Season 3 was, Season 2 is still really, really leaning hard on nostalgia and fan service. I mean, the season-long plot being a really lazy, badly constructed riff on Star Trek 4, even to the point of having that awful, awful joke in the bus, which makes no sense on any level and isn't remotely funny, where Seven and Raffi encounter the punk with the boombox from Star Trek 4, who for some reason in the last 40 years has remained exactly the same fucking guy, except he conveniently relocated from San Francisco to Los Angeles so he could encounter Seven and Raffi. It's awful. I hate it. Yeah, there's tons of nostalgia in Season 2 of Picard, so that part of it doesn't make sense, but maybe that was also part of Q's trick. Maybe it's just that you can't trust Q. If Q ever shows up to your house and says, "What kind of Star Trek show would you like to see?" Just don't engage. Just ignore him. Hamuda says, "Oh, come on. A Q played by an actor named Susie? And you went with Lady Q? Susie Q was right there. I did come up with Qnier for Q's son. Do I get no credit for that? Is that not good enough for you? Nothing's ever good enough for you people. You always want more. No matter what I give you, you always want more." Susie Q is good. I wish I had thought of that. This one's from Sean O'Neill. "Your mention of the comet in the intro reminded me of the link between comets and high-quality Trek you pointed out whilst reviewing Strange New Worlds. I now know why Year of Hell truly rubs you the wrong way. Chakotay talks about destroying a comet in that in order to improve history. Such a slap in the face to a Trek tradition." Yeah, and by Chakotay, who, of all the Star Trek characters, he's the last guy who should be trying to get rid of an omen of goodness in a Star Trek episode. Chakotay needs all the help he can get. In fact, maybe that's why Chakotay was so good in Prodigy after being such a non-entity on Voyager for 7 years. At some point in the intervening years between the end of Voyager and Chakotay showing up in Prodigy, he must have had a really close encounter with a comet that just turned everything around. And when we catch back up with him on Prodigy, he's suddenly become this fully realized great character. It was off-screen comet intervention. That is the only explanation. This one's from Mike Dignam. "The nail in the coffin was Picard. The writers never understood Star Trek." I don't know if I would go that far. And that's a really easy thing to say. And it's the kind of thing that people who just want to reject everything since Discovery would say. Because, I mean, people say that about Discovery. They've said that about Discovery since it started. They've said it about Picard. They've said it about the J.J. Abrams movies. Oh, the people who made this, they just don't understand Star Trek. I don't think that's it, for a couple of reasons. First of all, and maybe this is another case of me sort of pushing up against the excessive reverence that some fans have for Star Trek, but Star Trek's not that hard to understand. Let's be real about this. Like, Star Trek, as much as I love it, and as much as I could go on and on and on and on about how great Star Trek is and all the stuff about Star Trek that I love and admire and am grateful for and hope to see more of, when you boil it down, Star Trek's really not that difficult to understand. It's pretty simple. So the idea that the writers of the new show don't get it, I don't think is the problem. Nor is the problem that, well, they just didn't, they don't know it. They haven't watched it. They haven't seen it. Like, I know for a fact that some of the writers and producers of the current Star Trek shows are huge Star Trek nerds. And some of them manage to be good writers despite that. And some of them just completely give themselves over to their nerddom, and it is very much to the detriment of their work. But I don't think it's that they didn't understand Star Trek. With Picard specifically, and especially season 2, it's that somehow they forgot how to write drama. Like, it's not, oh, the problem with this is clearly they don't get Star Trek. Like, no, they don't get how a television show is supposed to work. They don't get how a story is supposed to work. And even in that case, I don't think the people who wrote season 2 of Picard or any bad Star Trek, I don't think it's that they just don't know. I don't think it's that they're incapable of telling a story in the right way. I don't think that's it. It's not a lack of talent. It's not a lack of skill. It's not a lack of basic, writing mechanics. I don't think any of that is the case. Sometimes people just do bad work. And under certain conditions, maybe the studio making certain demands, maybe certain factors that are out of people's control that are happening beyond the scope of the project. I don't know what the explanation is. And part of what makes season 2 of Picard specifically so fascinating to me is that it's really hard for me to imagine even how it could have come out not only that bad, but bad in that particular way. Like, an explanation does not suggest itself to me at all. It's fascinating because it's kind of unfathomable. Because even mediocre writers should be able to do something that was better than season 2 of Picard, and yet season 2 of Picard came out the way it came out. So it's a lot more complicated than, well, they just never understood Star Trek. Here's one from Eorzean Tours. I live my life chasing a feeling that comes even 1% close to the feeling of self-satisfaction that Steve felt when he perfectly set up that butler pun at the end. I hate to derail your meaning of life. First of all, thank you very much for the compliment there. That butler did it thing came about because I had no ending for that video. Like, I was writing the video and I got close to where I thought it was the end. I should wrap it up. And I had no idea what the ending was. And I thought back to the question of, whoa, who did it? Who's the culprit? Which Star Trek show ruined Q? And that cliche came to my mind of, oh, the butler did it. And I thought, I wonder if there's a way I can shoehorn that into this where it makes sense. And so I wrote that ending, and then I went back and I put in the setup for it earlier on. And I'm glad that it worked. Like, from my perspective as the writer, it's really like I hammered that in there so that I would have an ending. And I think it worked out. Like, I'm happy with how it came out, but I'm happy that I'm happy that you felt that way about it. Because I really didn't get like that smug self-satisfaction. It was more like, all right, there you go. That's the end. I made that work, right? I wrote the ending, and then I went back earlier in the script and I wedged it open and I stuffed a butler reference in there to be the setup so that at the end it would make some kind of sense. And that was it. So no like self-satisfaction of like, good job, Shives. It was, oh shit, how am I going to end this? And I figured something out. So I'm very, very glad that it worked for you. Here's one from Robert Helm. Delancey recently commented that he more or less thought the arc Q underwent in Picard Season 2 was garbage. Hey, a job's a job. That last bit is really important there. A job's a job. That is something that I didn't necessarily understand or attach importance to when I was younger, but now I always remind myself, whenever I watch a show or a movie or whatever that is just terrible. Like, unless there is something morally offensive about it, I never say either to myself or to other people, well, that never should have been made. Because even a bad movie or a bad TV show put money in people's pockets, put food on people's tables. That's why I usually say, like, if I, when I, on the movie review podcast that I do with Jason Harding, we talk about this a lot when we're reviewing a movie that we think is bad. And something that I will often say is, well, I hope that so-and-so at least got paid for it. If there's an actor in it that I really like and they find themselves in the middle of this terrible movie, well, I hope they at least made some money from it, because even a bad movie puts people to work. And so it is extremely rare for me to ever come away from a bad movie or a bad TV show with the feeling of, oh, I wish this didn't exist. No, it's fine that it exists. There are far worse things in the world than a shitty TV show. As much as I have ripped apart Picard Season 2, and as bad as I find it to be, and as little things of value as I think it has, I literally believe it's one of the worst seasons of television I've ever seen. It's awful. Do I wish that they had not made it? Do I wish that it did not exist? No. I'm glad that it exists, if for no other reason than it was a job for people. And some of the people, hopefully including John Delancey, it was a well-paying job and it made them some good money. And I'm happy for that. And I'm glad for that. And that is worth dipshits like me watching a show that wasn't as good as we thought it should have been. These next several comments are from my video where I talk about my top 5 favorite episodes of Star Trek Voyager. This one is from Talon1124, who says, I'm afraid. I know. The delivery sticks with me years afterward. Janeway became a recurring nightmare figure for months, a shadowed boogie woman who just sat there menacingly. Referring, of course, to the ending of my favorite Voyager episode, The Thaw. What I really, really love about that line reading from Janeway, from Kate Mulgrew, is that it is this close to being too much. Like, it is so close to being over the top and to ending that, like, it's supposed to be, like, scary and dramatic and also triumphant, right? Because Janeway has defeated the villain. She has overcome fear. She has thwarted the clown, right? It's supposed to be like a serious moment, but the way she says it with that scary, I know, right? It's so close to just being campy, to being over the top, which is not the reaction I think you want at that point in the episode. But I love the way I love that tension. I love how it's that close, right? Kate Mulgrew she's like, I'm going to take this almost too far, but I'm gonna stop right here. And I love that. And that's one of the reasons why it works so well, because it almost doesn't work. Here's one from 242 Sighting. I remember how excited I was after the thaw. I was at school the next day, and my even more trekked out friend was just as excited. Voyager had finally had its best of both worlds, its past tense. Every Trek show just needed to limp along enough to hit its stride. Oh well, I remember when The Thaw originally aired too, and something that I think fans who didn't watch it when it originally aired, or maybe just weren't paying attention to the same stuff that I was paying attention to when it originally aired, who don't remember the episode as fondly or don't think it's that great of an episode, because, I think there are probably some comments on that video, and I've gotten responses from people in the past when I've said that The Thaw is my favorite Voyager episode. There are a lot of Voyager fans that episode just doesn't register with them. Like they like the Borg episodes, they like the big event episodes like Timeless or Year of Hell, and they don't really like The Thaw. Just seems like no big deal to them. They're like, really, that episode? That's your favorite episode? But at the time, it wasn't just you and your friend. When The Thaw aired, like there were a lot of people that thought, oh shit, now we're talking like this. Yeah, Voyager's finally starting to get it. I read TV Guide, right? We got TV Guide back in the day in the 1990s, children, for those of you who are too young to remember. There used to be a magazine called TV Guide, and it would tell you what was on TV on all the different channels in your local area. And when you were paging through the TV Guide on the weekly listings, if there was an episode of a particular show that the editors of TV Guide were really extra excited about or thought was especially good, there would be a feature on some of the pages of the TV Guide listings where there was like a little box and it would have a longer feature, maybe just like a paragraph, but something to draw your attention to say, no, now, of all the stuff that's on TV tonight, make sure you watch this. Like, this is something not to miss. This is special. And The Thaw got one of those. And I don't know if it was the first regular episode of Voyager that got one of those, but it was not like super common for episodes of Star Trek shows to get those. And The Thaw got one, and it was a really glowing review of like, oh, this is a really good episode. You don't want to miss this. Make sure you watch this, especially if you're a Star Trek fan. I mean, at the time, it was thought of as a creative high point of the series by people who were like Star Trek fans and hardcore members of the fan base, and by people who were just TV critics or just watched whatever was on. It was a really, really, really well-regarded episode. And I have felt that way about it ever since. And it's kind of interesting that like the more recent converts to the fandom, people who were too young to watch it at the time but have discovered the show more recently, they respond more strongly to other shows that, you know, personally, I, in many cases, don't like at all or don't give a shit about. And they see something like The Thaw and they're like, whatever. Just, I'm not saying that one side is right or wrong. I'm just saying it's interesting. And also, I mean, I'm implying that I'm right. Starbrand 3726. Voyager is still my favorite Trek series. I like how they couldn't just run to Starbase, whatever, for repairs and resupply. When stuff broke, they had to fix it. The idea of surviving so far from home appealed to me. Yeah, and it's just a shame they didn't actually make that show. Stephen G. Clenard, solid list. Not necessarily top 5, but my favorite Voyager performance is Jerry Ryan in Body and Soul. Basically, the Doctor downloads into Seven's Borg implants, allowing Ryan to perform a manic and over-the-top Robert Picardo Doctor impression. She is so good that it's easy to forget that we aren't watching Picardo. I had generally been kind of meh on Ryan and Seven until this episode. Yeah, it is a good episode, and it's a really good performance from Jerry Ryan, and it's an example of one of those things that I really, really like. When any TV show does this, but especially a Star Trek show, because there is that element of fantasy to it where you can go a little further than you could in a more grounded, realistic drama, of just giving the actors an excuse to go nuts and just have fun and go over the top and play something other than their regular character or have their regular character act in a very uncharacteristic way. And this is an especially fun example of that because it's not just 7 of 9 having an experience that causes her to act like something other than 7 of 9 and to say and do things and behave in a way that she never would otherwise, and allowing Jerry Ryan to have fun as an actor, but specifically acting like another character. Like that adds another layer to it. It's so much fun to not just see Jerry Ryan get to play 7 of 9 as not 7 of 9 and just kind of ham it up, but specifically to play 7 of 9 as the Doctor and to do it in a way where she's kind of channeling Robert Picardo. It's a ton of fun. It's a ton of fun. And thank you for bringing that up, Stephen. And I will still presumably be seeing you in hell. Here's one from Doc Mass. The only real criticism is that it should have been more like Battlestar Galactica in tone, an ongoing year of hell, but less extreme. Well, maybe, but I don't know if it really needed to be that serious in tone. I mean, I would have loved if the show remembered its premise more often and took its premise more seriously and made the show more about, like I was saying in response to the earlier comment, like about a ship that was cut off from its support, that was stranded in unfamiliar territory, that was filled with people who were far from home and wanted to get back home and weren't sure if they were ever going to see their home again. Like, I feel like the show needed to be more about those things. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it needed to be like really serious and really grim in tone. You could have still had a kind of breezy adventure show in tone while making better use of the premise of the series. And one more from the Best of Star Trek Voyager video from Admanios. It's a superbly executed story rooted in a compelling concept. Yeah, it was called Dragon's Egg by Robert L. Forward, and it was published in 1980. Are you seriously telling me that a Star Trek episode borrowed heavily from a pre-existing science fiction story? What the fuck? And these next several comments are from the video I made about that unification short that was produced by the Roddenberry Archive, which I described as Deepfaked Fanwank. This first one is from Kira, who says, the human adventure is just recycling. Yeah, apparently. And you know, there's part of me that wonders if they had put that as like a lower third over the final scene, like they did for the human adventures just beginning at the end of Star Trek 3. Like if they had put that at the end of that short, I wonder if, in my eyes at least, that wouldn't have partially redeemed it. Like, if it had ended with, the human adventure is just recycling, and indicated that there was at least some glimmer of awareness on the part of the people that made this thing of how hollow and meaningless and empty it is. Like, I don't know. At least it would have been, and yeah, oh yeah, we get it. Like, we know what this is. Like, you don't have to tell us. Like, that would have at least been something. I don't know. William George. Leonard's last wish was to be resurrected as a broad pantomime. Yeah, I mean, for the people who say, oh, it was a wonderful tribute to Leonard Nimoy, maybe that's how it was intended, but is that really what Leonard Nimoy would have wanted? He was a very proud actor and a very serious actor. Even though he involved himself in a lot of, very silly projects, he took his role and his characters very seriously. I mean, he very famously declined to play Spock in Star Trek Generations when an earlier draft of the script would have had Spock and Dr. McCoy appear in it along with Captain Kirk. And Leonard Nimoy said, I'm not going to do it because there's no reason for Spock to be there. Like, he took that character seriously enough and took his work as an actor seriously enough that if he didn't feel there was a story worth telling in that movie, he just said no. He said, no, I don't have to do that. I'm not going to do that. And it's really hard for me to watch the unification short and see anything in there that Leonard Nimoy, if he were still alive, would have said, oh yes, I have to do that. Like, that is a role I want to play. I don't see what the appeal for Leonard Nimoy would have been if he were still alive. And yeah, it might be nice for some of the fans who are super, like, nostalgic about it and have all sorts of warm, fuzzy feelings about Leonard Nimoy and Spock. They look at it and they go, oh, isn't that wonderful? What a beautiful tribute. I wonder if Leonard Nimoy would have felt the same way. And I don't know. Who knows? Maybe he would have loved it. I have no idea. I didn't know him. And even if I did know him, you can never know what's in someone's heart or what's in someone's head. People are unpredictable. Maybe he would have loved it. But based on what his attitude toward his acting work and specifically toward the character of Spock seemed to be while he was alive, something tells me he would not have been crazy about it. Danny H. It took me a few viewings to get what was going on beyond Kirk and Spock seeing each other again. There's an article out from the creators of the short explaining what's actually going on and how they wanted to leave it open to interpretation, but still used very obscure references that most Trek fans would miss. Gary Mitchell in the short is supposed to be an alternate history Gary that was in an old DC Star Trek comic run that Kirk failed to kill. A lot of what is in those Roddenberry Archive shorts is taken from Star Trek comics. That's one of the reasons why Yeoman Colt is such a central figure. I reference that in the video and kind of make fun of it because it does feel like they sort of just randomly picked a supporting character, an incredibly obscure supporting character from The Cage, and said, let's make her the central figure of all of this stuff. But that is drawn from a storyline in the comics. There was actually a really good Star Trek comic in either the 90s or the early 2000s that was centered on Captain Pike's command of the Enterprise, and it was called Star Trek Early Voyages. I remember, I haven't read it for a while, but I remember it being really good and really liking it. But there's a storyline in that about Yeoman Colt, like experiencing some kind of like interdimensional time travel thing and seeing visions of the future and that kind of thing. So that's where that comes from. That's what they're referencing when they do that in the shorts. And yeah, it's like, it's such a niche, obscure reference that most fans aren't going to get, and that is never explained or expanded upon. It's just some shit that's happening, and it seems completely inexplicable, and it's really central to all of these, Roddenberry archive shorts. And it just, yeah, I mean, it just seems really fan-wanky. It's really fanficky and fan-wanky. And, it just seems like it's something that's made for an incredibly tiny little audience that might recognize it and go, ooh, that's for us. But most people are just going to watch it and go, what the fuck is this? MH, a few short clips to tell a quick story or finalize a story arc? Fine. An entire series of deep-faked actors? F that. I definitely agree with that second part. An entire series of deep-faked actors, fuck that. But I would quibble with the first part. You say it's fine if it's just a few short clips to tell a quick story or finalize a story arc. Maybe that would be fine, but I don't think that's what that unification short is. I don't think it does either one of those things. I don't think it tells a story of any kind, really. Except in a very vague, very basic sense. And it doesn't finalize any story arc. And I feel like a lot of people feel that, well, because Kirk and Spock never got a farewell on screen, that because Kirk died the way he died, and then Spock died the way he died, and there was never like a final parting between them that we got to see, that was like a loose thread. And I don't see it that way. Like, their stories were over already. Like, we didn't need to see this. Just because these two characters that we love, who were very close to each other, never got an on-screen goodbye that we would have perhaps liked to see. Just because that never happened, that doesn't mean that's an unfinished story. Two characters that we would have liked to see say farewell to each other never did it. That's not an unfinished story. That's not a story arc that needs to be finalized. That's not a loop that needs to be closed. It was over. Captain Kirk was dead. Spock was dead. And the fact that they had to literally resurrect Captain Kirk and then have him cross into a different parallel universe in order to make this happen kind of tells you, no, Kirk's story was over. Even for Star Trek, the storytellers had to resort to some extraordinary means to bring him back and get him into this situation so that he could, share a moment with Spock before Spock died. That's not a storyline that needed finished. That's some shit that some nerds hammered onto the end of it in a completely contrived, unnatural way because, I don't know, some Trekkies just can't come until they see Kirk and Spock hold hands like that one last time. Did you come? Are you feeling better now? Can the rest of us go to bed? Did you get what you needed? Here's one from Texas Yojimbo. Question, just to annoy Steve, is Paramount telling us that this is canon? Is this canonically what Kirk is seeing as he goes on to Kirk heaven? And does this close the door on Trek canonizing the plot of Shatner's novel where he comes back as a Borg, The Return? If so, maybe this is a blessing in disguise? I don't give a shit what's canon and what's not. So I'm perfectly happy to consider the unification short canon. That doesn't bother me at all. It doesn't make it any better. I still think it sucks. But if Paramount says, yeah, you know what? We officially licensed this and we're going to consider this canon. I don't think they've done that. But if they did, if Alex Kurtzman said, sure, it's canon, I don't care. It doesn't bother me at all. I mean, it's still the shits. Like, it literally does. It literally makes no difference to me at all what is canon and what is not. I could not give less of a fuck. Make it canon. Make Shatner's novels canon too. In fact, I would love that. I would love it if Paramount said not only is Unification canon, but all of the William Shatner Star Trek novels, they are also canon too. I would love that. Because those two things are completely irreconcilable. And that would drive Star Trek nerds fucking crazy. If Paramount said, no, they're both canon. And it's not parallel universes. They're both canon for the prime timeline. Oh, God, I would love that. It would be worth doing just for the excessive, over-the-top reaction of certain kinds of Star Trek fans. I really hope they do it now. And one more from that video. This is from Reaver Lord Taunus. Resurrect Jeffrey Hunter. What is he, Jesus Christ? Oh, God, I both hate it and love it when people come up with jokes that as soon as I see it, I wish I had written it. I wish I had put in a Jeffrey Hunter Jesus joke in that video. It was as you have just proven, it was the perfect opportunity. I said digitally resurrect Jeffrey Hunter. How could I have not made a Jesus joke? Fuck. Thank you, and I hate you. And this next comment is not from a recent video that I did. It's a recent comment, but it's from a video I put up a while back about the legacy of Star Trek Discovery that I made after the end of that show. And it's from Will Smith, who says, would love to see a video on the whole Lower Decks controversy regarding Discovery as canon. My thought is, love or hate the show, Strange New Worlds can't happen without this show as canon. And this isn't really worth making a whole video about, because you call it the Lower Decks controversy, but to anyone with half a brain, there is no controversy. It's something that has been ginned up by, again, a certain kind of Star Trek fan who has an axe to grind against Discovery and is looking for any excuse to invalidate Discovery and to say, Discovery is not canon, because that actually means something. There are some, believe it or not, there are some people who are such sad little nerds that they actually care whether or not something is considered canon. And if they can convince themselves that Discovery, a show that they don't like, is no longer considered canon, that is some kind of victory in their minds. That's like, we did it. The show is no longer canon. We win. Like, they're like I said, they're pathetic little nerds. They're pathetic little losers. And what this is about, for those of you who don't know, is there is a really quick gag in the last episode of Lower Decks. And as in keeping with custom for Lower Decks, it's not a funny gag at all. But what happens is they're encountering there's a big spatial anomaly that is breaking down the barriers between parallel realities. And it's changing objects or people in one reality into a version of themselves from another reality is basically what's happening. So ships will change into different kinds of ships, and people will change, like people's appearances will change. And there's a scene in that episode where a Klingon ship encounters this anomaly and is affected by, the reality warping properties of this anomaly. And there's a Klingon who looks like Klingons typically look in Lower Decks, which is modeled after like how Klingons looked in TNG, and subsequent Star Trek shows. And this Klingon is affected by this anomaly, and they turn briefly into a Klingon that looks like Klingons looked in season 1 of Discovery. And their entire ship changes into the design of a Klingon ship from season 1 of Discovery, and then the ship is destroyed, right? And so that happens. Again, it's a meaningless gag. It's just, hey, look at that, like most of the gags in Lower Decks, and it's one of the reasons why I didn't mostly enjoy that show. But that happens, and then later on in the episode, they explain what that anomaly is and what it's doing. And one of the characters says it's changing people, or it's changing things that it affects into other possible forms from across the multiverse. It's something like that is the explanation. And so these Discovery haters latched onto that and said, aha, it changes them into other things from across the multiverse. And that Klingon was changed into a Discovery Klingon, which means that Discovery Klingons, and therefore all of the rest of Discovery, didn't take place in the Prime timeline. It took place in another reality. It's no longer canon. We win, right? That's the logic. When nothing of the kind happened. Paramount has not declared that Discovery wasn't canon. Paramount has not said that Discovery took place in an alternate reality. Paramount and the producers of Discovery have been very clear from before the show even aired that Discovery is set in the Prime timeline. Period. They have not changed that, and literally nothing about that Lower Decks gag suggests that that is different. Having a TNG-type Klingon change into a Discovery-type Klingon does not mean that therefore the Discovery-type Klingons were from a show that took place in an alternate reality. It could mean that it comes from a reality where Klingons look like that, because we know that in a lot of these alternate realities, things still look the same as they do in other realities. So there could be another reality where Klingons look like they looked in season 1 of Discovery, and that's what that was. Or it could be that that Klingon character is looking like she would have looked if she had lived 100 years ago. Or it could just be a dumb joke in a dumb show, which is what it was. Like the idea that these fans are taking this dumb joke in a dumb show and using that to extrapolate, aha, the show we didn't like is no longer canon. The whole thing is such a big deal about absolutely nothing. The Lower Decks controversy is nothing of the kind. It's not a controversy. It doesn't mean that anything has been wiped from canon. And by the way, as I said in a previous answer to an earlier comment, and as I said earlier in this answer, it shouldn't fucking matter anyway. Who gives a shit what's canon? It doesn't matter. Do you like the show? I don't like Lower Decks. As far as I'm concerned, it's canon. Why shouldn't it be canon? Because I don't like it? That's a silly reason. It's silly to care about what is canon and what is not. I don't like the show because I don't like the qualities of the show. Whether or not it's canon is irrelevant to me. I like Star Trek Discovery. At least I like a lot of it. I don't like all of it. I don't think it's perfect. It's very flawed in a lot of ways. But overall, I like it. Would I like it less if they said it wasn't canon? No. Do I like it more because they say it is canon? No, it makes no fucking difference to me. It's the same show. So that's my response. In a very long-winded way. That's my response to the Lower Decks quote-unquote controversy regarding Discovery being canon. It doesn't make any difference as to whether it's canon or not, and even if it did, who fucking cares? That's it. That's the last comment I'm responding to. Thank you all so much for watching these videos, for leaving comments, for giving me something to respond to. I really, really appreciate it. I mean, I couldn't do this YouTube thing in general without your viewership and your support. And I couldn't do these videos in particular, these comment responses, if you weren't so awesome about leaving comments and asking such great questions and pointing out things that I miss when I do the videos and all of the wonderful things that are brought to light in these comments. Thank you all so, so much. Don't forget, if you want to support my channel and support the work I do on YouTube, you can become a patron at patreon.com/Steve Shives. You can become a channel member by clicking the join button. Don't forget to like and subscribe the video. If you want to give me a one-time gift as opposed to becoming a monthly subscriber through Patreon or YouTube membership, you can always do that through the thanks button here on the YouTube page or through PayPal or Venmo. Links for those are in the video description. Thanks once again for watching. Happy New Year, everybody. And I will see you next time. Keep watching. Keep leaving comments so I can keep doing easy videos like this. Bye, everybody.